Today, Ducati announced a new entry into their large capacity Scrambler lineup, the Scrambler 1100 Pro Dark. They say that it offers a new entry into the land of joy. So in today's video, we'll take a look over the details and see how it stacks up against the other bikes in the Scrambler range. But before we get started, if you're new here and you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news and new bikes for 2021 right here on YouTube, then please do remember to hit subscribe. If you can cast your mind back to the pre-COVID world of busy motorcycle shows, Ducati actually launched a dark version of the 800 Scrambler back at EICMA in Milan in 2019. The concept was simple: do away with the expensive finishes and components in order to offer a bike of the same mechanical specs but at the lowest possible price point. And it appears to have worked. From DVLA vehicle registration data, it looks as though they've sold more of the Scrambler Icon Dark in the UK than they have of the two other colours on offer this year. So why not apply the same treatment to the bigger brother of the 800, the Scrambler 1100 Pro? Before this launch, there were two models of the 1100 Scrambler, the Pro and the Pro Sport. In terms of specs, they both use an air and oil cooled 2-valve L-twin engine, which is good for 86 horsepower at 7,500 RPM and 65 pound-feet or 88 Nm of peak torque at 4,750 RPM. The frame is a steel trellis with an aluminium subframe, and in total the bike weighs in at 189 kilograms dry. Brakes are from Brembo in the form of their M4.32 radially mounted monoblock calipers at the front, and wheels are 10-spoke aluminium and shod with Pirelli's flat track style MT60 RS tyres, which they say are developed specifically for the Scrambler range. In terms of electronics, there are three riding modes of Active, Journey and City, which translate roughly to the usual Sport, Road and Rain. Throttle response and traction control are both affected by each of the modes, and an inertial measurement unit provides data to enable lean-sensitive ABS for enhanced safety through corners in less grippy conditions. The main difference between the Pro and the Pro Sport is that the Sport gets much better suspension. Whereas the Pro rides on 45mm upside-down Marzocchi forks and a KYB shock, the Pro Sport gets the full Öhlins treatment with a fully adjustable 48mm upside-down fork and preload and rebound adjustable shock. There are a couple of other tweaks too, like lower, narrower bars for a sportier feel, bar and mirrors for a sportier look, as well as an awesome matte black finish with glossy 1100 logo on the tank paired with a brown saddle. But the majority of the price difference has to be put down to that suspension upgrade. The Scrambler 1100 Pro comes in at £11,295 in the UK, with the Sport costing £12,795, so £1,500 more. But the Scrambler 1100 Pro Dark offers a new entry point into the 1100 range at £10,495, so £800 cheaper than the regular Pro, and it'll be available in dealers almost immediately, with Ducati stating October 2020. Now that's a decent difference in the amount of cash, and the specs are pretty much exactly the same as the 1100 Pro, with just three changes outlined in the press release. The first is the matte black paint scheme, the second is that some parts use a natural anodized finish instead of black, and lastly, it has what they call classic mirrors, which I think translates to cheaper. Combined, these tweaks mean that it has more of the look of a larger version of the Scrambler 800 with the painted tank and bare aluminium side panels, whereas the other two bikes have played around a little with the tank paint and panels. And so I think it now represents a bit of a conundrum for anyone considering an 800 Scrambler, especially the more premium variants such as the full throttle, which costs £9,500, or the Cafe Racer at just under 10. For an extra £500, you can now get the 1100 Pro Dark, and although 13 more horsepower doesn't sound like a massive leap, it does have an extra 20-odd Nm of peak torque, and it produces it 1,000 RPM lower down in the rev range, so it ought to feel a lot more gutsy for real-world riding. On top of that, you get better suspension and a pair of brakes at the front instead of the single Brembo. Very tempting indeed if you can stomach the extra 10 or 15 kilograms grams of weight. It might also be tempting for anyone considering the 1100 Scrambler's main competitor, the Triumph Scrambler 1200, at 11,500 for the road-biased XC and 12,300 for the up-spec'd and more off-road capable XE, you'd be saving at least $1,000 by going for this bike. Okay, so the Triumph produces more power and torque, the electronics are much better with a well-equipped TFT dash, and the finish is awesome, but if you're super price sensitive, the Ducati is worth a thought. In fact, I reckon there are 3 decent reasons to buy this bike. One is if you're after an 1100 Scrambler and want it in black. The second, if you're after an 1100 Scrambler and want the cheapest one possible. And the third, as Ducati also point out in their press release, is if you're buying one as a base bike for customization, which the Scrambler 800 is already fairly popular for. There's no point in paying for a fancy paint job, brown saddle, and better finished components if you're only going to rip it apart, chop it up, and repaint them all. Better to save the 800 quid and spend it on some new Rizoma mirrors. So there we have it, the new Scrambler 1100 Pro Dark from Ducati. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the price is now low enough to make it a tempting option versus the Triumph Scramblers? Or would you go for a completely different bike altogether? Let me know in the comments, and if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and I'll catch you next time.